This is The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. For the last few years, thousands of women have been in the initial stages of a legal battle over hair products they believe made them sick. Over 10,000 women are suing companies like L'Oreal and Revlon after research studies found that people who use relaxers frequently are at higher risk of developing cancer than those who do not. It could be years before we know the outcome of the lawsuit, but it raises important questions about the risks associated with hair products, risks that are present every day in a city like Detroit, where countless hairdressers and stylists set up shop here. Aisha Langford is a professor of public health at Wayne State University's School of Medicine, whose work focuses on health communication, and she joins me now to talk all about this. Professor Langford, welcome to the program.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so first I want to define what relaxers are in this context. It's a hair straightening treatment, and it's commonly used in black hair to create hairstyles. What are some of the impacts of that relaxer, and what can it do to someone's head, and the risks when using it?
Okay, so as you said, hair relaxers have historically been used to straighten hair, and there are chemicals in there to help straighten hair. So there are some concerns about hair relaxers are that they can damage the scalp or cause burns or irritate the scalp. But other concerns, as you mentioned, are that the chemicals in hair relaxers may be linked or have been shown to be associated or linked to some uterine cancers. And it's a complicated mechanism and pathway, but we think that part of the reason is that when women are getting the relaxers, they are smelling and inhaling some of those chemicals, but then the chemicals are also being absorbed through the scalp. And some of the chemicals of concern may be disrupting some of the hormone processes in our bodies. And cancers like uterine cancer actually are sensitive to hormones. So the idea or the proposed idea is that the chemicals in these hair relaxers may be disrupting or mimicking different hormone processes in the body. And that might be one of the reasons that we're seeing an increased risk or association between hair relaxers and uterine cancer.
Okay, so you outlined a number of different risks, but even before we talked about the hair relaxers there, you were talking about scalps and burns. Why, if there are these effects of a product like this, a treatment like this, why then use this product? How did it become so popular? I want to kind of get into the history of how this started being used to begin with. Okay,
so Black women and hair and our hair journey can be complicated. So I think there's several potential reasons why Black women may choose or have chosen to get hair relaxers. Years and years ago, one of the reasons was for social acceptance. There were a lot of pressures for some women, especially in the workplace, around what is quote unquote professional looking. Yeah. And there was not an appreciation that braids and dreadlocks and natural hair that was deemed as unprofessional or looking unkept. So some women chose to use hair relaxers or straighten their hair, really, I think, for social acceptance and for workplace acceptance. Historically, there's also been ideals about what is beautiful. We've sometimes looked at European colleagues or straight hair as beauty or standards of beauty in the United States. So I think part of systemic racism or just acceptance of what is beautiful and not. So that might be another reason why people have historically chosen to straighten their hair with hair relaxers. But for other women, they may have chosen to get hair relaxers because it's a little bit easier for some people to manage their hair when their hair is straightened versus using more managing your hair in its natural state. So some people do it for convenience. So there are a lot of different reasons.
And relaxers, perms, these different treatments for hair, they're kind of also very culturally ingrained from an early age. Even.
Yes. And I would also say I'm talking more from society, right? And trying to be accepted in society, but also within the Black community, we also have had conversations and perceptions of like what's good hair,
Oh, yeah.
what's, beautiful hair. And in some families, trying to manage young girls' hair and, like I said, perceptions of what's considered easy or hard to manage hair. That has also been a reason why some people have chosen to put hair relaxers in younger children as well.
Yeah.
And then also kind of internal thoughts about nappy hair and all of these things. So there's kind of external societal pressures, and then even dialogue within the Black community about hair practices and how we think about hair and what's good hair and bad hair. I don't like those terms, but I think we should also acknowledge that there's also ongoing conversations and opinions within the community as well.
How are those conversations evolving? Have they changed in the last few years, over the last few decades? You see, I know in the last decade, at least in the 2010s, there was somewhat of a natural hair movement. Can you speak to just kind of how it's changed since those times till now?
Right. So I think there have been a lot of things happening over the last couple of decades. So I'm not sure if there was like an official start of the natural hair movement, but there was more, I think, ongoing conversation about chemicals and maybe adopting more quote unquote natural or like less chemically based ways to manage hair. So there, I think, has been more of a openness and conversation about kind of this natural movement that you've mentioned. We've also had legislation and conversations like the Crown Act, and which there are still ways to go. But I think ongoing conversations within society, within workplaces about not policing people's hair and hopefully expanding our view of like what's considered professional, whether or not you choose to get braids or wear dreadlocks or straighten your hair or wear a wig or get a weave, that has nothing to do with your brain and your ability to do a job. So I think that as a society, we are evolving. We're not totally there yet. And for some people, like for myself, I have had relaxers in the past, and I have very sensitive scalp. So I was getting more sensitized to the relaxers. And when I moved to New York in 2015, actually, it was my hairdresser that suggested, let's just try to not do the relaxer.
Oh, wow.
He was like, you can get a similar look without doing the hair relaxer. So I moved over time to like a silk press. I grew out all of my relaxer, and now I don't have any hair relaxer. But again, my decision to do that was really just because I was getting scalp irritation and it was bothering me more over time. And my hairdresser in New York said, hey, there's some other options here. Why don't we just try to stop and try and see if that will be helpful?
So it's like a straighter hair look without the chemicals.
Yes. So I have a silk press. A lot of women, or some women, choose, if they decide not to do hair relaxers to straighten the hair, they may consider a silk press, which is basically a way to straighten your hair with a flat iron or through heat. And, you have to be careful with that too. So a benefit potentially of moving to like a silk press or other ways that are not relaxer based is that you do have to, you can use heat, but you need to have a hairdresser that knows what they're doing and who's taking good care of your hair, good shampoos, good conditioners, making sure you're getting trims, and making sure they're using things like heat protectant and not using too much heat, because if you have too much heat on your hair, you can create another problem, like with hair breakage and your hair being damaged, depending on what they're doing. Again, with the heating process or other ways to like manage hair, you could also be having other scalp irritation. So it's not that if you stop getting hair relaxers that everything is all good and your hair is going to automatically be healthy. There are a lot of things that go into it.
I'm glad you brought that up. I am going to want to get to that. Some of the other styles that people use that also could present some risks a little later in this conversation. But I want to know, as it pertains to relaxers themselves too, the usage of them, has that changed more recently? Do you feel like we're still seeing people get relaxers as much as they did before, or has it changed given kind of the context you laid out about all the different movements that have occurred? Yeah,
so unfortunately, I don't have any market trends. I do have, I guess, some anecdotal information from some of the hairdressers that I know. They have said that they have seen a decline in hair relaxers, probably over the last 10 or 15 years, in part because consumers are choosing different styles, but also some hairdressers are not as comfortable doing offering hair relaxers. But then I was reading in the news the other day that for whatever reason, they haven't totally given up the hair relaxers, and some women in 2025 still may choose to do it. So I think there may be an uptick. We just don't know. The trends in markets are up and down, but part of the I guess decline is a recognition by consumers and Black women that there are various ways to do your hair and have a straight look if that's what you want. And again, I think awareness by hairdressers that some of them are not comfortable offering hair relaxers because of the studies that we've talked about.
Yeah. You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Carrie Jr. II. My guest is public health professor Aisha Langford from Wayne State University. And we are discussing hairstyles and relaxers and the ongoing lawsuit against manufacturers who have hair care products. Now, I kind of want to talk about this lawsuit real quick so we can understand like what's important to know about it for people who still are interested in getting relaxers and have heard this and are wondering, wait a minute, what does this really mean for me? So just some information on it. In October of 2022, the National Institute of Environmental Health Science, which is part of the NIH, they released research in October of 2022, and it linked frequent use of hair relaxers to an increased risk of developing cancer. And I want to give some details about this study, just because as a researcher yourself, I'm imagining you will know what's important for people to know when they hear researchers. So the study included over 33,000 women. They were aged 35 to 74. And the women were followed for almost 11 years. And during that time, 378 uterine cancer cases were diagnosed. So just from a research standpoint, you hear this lawsuit, you hear this research sparking the lawsuit. As a researcher yourself, what's important information for people to key in on when they hear that?
So there are a lot of great points that you brought up. I think the first point is to remember that association is not causation, and that's very important. So that study that you just mentioned is very important, and there was another study that came out in 2023 from colleagues at Boston University, and they evaluated data from the Black Women's Health Study, and they found similar trends. So I think the first thing for listeners to remember is that association is not causation, which means you can have a link, you can find a link, but there's a lot of factors, and this research is still new, so they can't definitively say hair relaxers cause uterine cancer. They have found a link statistically, which is important and we should pay attention to, but we can't say scientifically at this point, based on the data, that hair relaxers cause uterine cancer, but we still should be paying attention to it. Other things to remember is that these studies are observational, which means they follow women over time. Typically, they are asking questions in a survey form or an interview form, and they're asking women to remember how often they got relaxers over a period of time. So sometimes we are really good at remembering the frequency, right? So if I asked you, how many times did you get your hair cut in 2024?
Great question.
You might be able to guesstimate it. I mean, if you go like every week, you could guesstimate it. But for women who get hair relaxers, depending on how often you go, it might be every 8 weeks, it might be every 12 weeks. You might get a relaxer twice a year. So my point there is sometimes you may not fully remember. So there's some limitations there. But so people are recalling based on their own self-report data. Also in these studies, to date, they don't have information about the brands of the hair relaxers. And there are a lot of different brands on the market. You can get a hair relaxer in a box from a grocery store or a pharmacy, or some women opt to get professional grade relaxers done at a salon, but we don't know the brands. And because we don't know the specific brands that these women used, we don't know the specific chemicals that were in those brands. Additionally, and I'm not advocating for people just to run out and get hair relaxers, but the ingredients have changed over time. For example, back in the day, a lot of hair relaxers had lye in them. Now, many of them do not have lye. There are some relaxers on the market that are deemed to be quote unquote organic, right? We don't quite know what that means. And then also, in addition to not knowing the specific brands of hair relaxers, there are various chemicals that are of concern to epidemiologists. But even within that cluster of chemicals that they're paying attention to that they think may be disrupting the hormone process, they don't know of the 5, for example, which ones are the most important and potentially a higher risk for uterine cancer. So there's a lot.
Not precise.
Right. We don't have that precise information at this point. So we know that there's an association and a increased risk based on statistics, but there's still a lot to know and learn going forward.
So then what should people who hear this then take from it? What should be their takeaway if they're like, I've been considering relaxers in 2025 and I hear this, and it's not saying that if I get one, I'm going to have this outcome. How do I make that decision?
That's a great point. And I think the goal here is to be informed, but not alarmist. So in these studies, there was a link with Black women who had hair relaxers and an increased risk of uterine cancer. But there are also Black women who have gotten uterine cancer who have not had relaxers. So it's not an either or. I think for people listening, you have a few different options. You can do nothing. If you get relaxers, you can keep getting relaxers if you want to. It's your choice. You could potentially spread out the frequency of how often you get relaxers if you choose to keep getting them. So, for example, if you went every 8 weeks, you might want to go every 12 weeks. So you could choose to space out the frequency. You could ask your hairstylist what brand of hair relaxer they use, and you might want to switch brands, or they may have a recommendation for maybe a better option of relaxer for your hair and your situation. You could stop getting relaxers altogether. And if you want a straight look or a straightened hair look, you could consider something like a silk press. You could also stop getting relaxers altogether and consider other hairstyles like braids or sister locks or dreadlocks or weaves or wigs. So there are a lot of different options. So I think the point here is just to understand that we should be paying attention to these studies, but also to realize there's a lot that still needs to be researched and learned, and that the goal really is to make an informed decision based on what you know and what's important to you and what kind of styles that you want for your life and your situation today.
We've got a few minutes left, but I want to kind of tie the bow on this lawsuit here, because one question I feel like pops up in people's minds, we talk about this and saying there's no direct link. It's like, then what is the lawsuit? What's the crux of it, right? And that's like the next question that comes to mind. The lead or co-lead attorney on this case, Fruda Bross, she is the co-lead on the multi-district litigation against the manufacturer. She kind of explains on a podcast in the spring of 2023 what the crux of this lawsuit is.
A lot of our claims are around exactly that, the failure to warn, which they were obligated to. It's really important as we talk about the claims and what their obligations are to understand that this isn't a drug case. It's not a medical device case. It's a cosmetics case. And there is a very specific CFR that governs cosmetics and sets the standard. So they had an obligation to warn if it may cause health issues in individuals, and they failed to do so.
So in that clip, she's describing that the main claim is the fact that they didn't warn these people or the women who use them. They're like, we're saying that because they weren't warned of it. They're not saying the product itself caused it. They're arguing that they didn't know that they didn't notify them. And to me, that brings questions of, maybe it's about asking questions as well. Everything you just laid out, including maybe the salon owner, or not the salon owner, but the hairstylist being like, hey, to your stylist, what is in this? How do I, like, what's going to be the potential risks of using these products? Might be another thing to take into consideration.
Right. So you bring up a lot of important points. So one, it will be really interesting to see how the lawsuit plays out, because there probably over the past 25 years or so, I think there's been a little under 30 studies broadly looking at outcomes of hair relaxers in general for various issues. But like I said, the research is growing, but it's still in early stages. So it'll really be interesting. Right now, we can only say that there's an association and not definitively causation. Now, the question is, should there be labels on hair relaxers? And that's an interesting point because we do have cancer risk information on cigarettes. We have warnings about the potential risk of drinking alcohol during pregnancy. And so that will be interesting to know if we have enough information right now to say we should definitively, as a policy issue, put labels on hair relaxers.
I want to come back to that point. What we'll do, we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll come back to this, and we've got a few more minutes to wrap this up. You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. Stay right there. You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. My guest right now is Professor Aisha Langford. She is a public health professor at Wayne State University. We've been talking about the lawsuit that has occurred with thousands of women who are claiming that hair care products raise their risk of getting uterine cancer, among other things, and the styles and pressures that are on women, particularly Black women, to straighten their hair. Before we left for break, we were talking about a lot of the potential outcomes and choices people have to learn more about what their circumstances are. Even during the break, we were just having a conversation about what's now known because of this new research, and that there are factors about who knows what and when that go into this whole equation.
Exactly. So we were talking about, should women, and in particular Black women, been warned, right? 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago. But as you mentioned, a lot of this research is newer. One big study came out in 2022. Another interesting and important study came out in 2023. And this relationship between hair relaxers and cancer, but also uterine cancer specifically, is ongoing. So it will be, I'm not a lawyer or an attorney, but it will be interesting to see if the research is newer and still developing. Can these companies be held liable for not warning people in the 80s that these chemicals may be linked to cancer if they didn't know that? But also, it also raises a policy issue about labeling. So from a public health and a medical perspective, for a variety of different reasons, it can take a long time to get a label put on a product, in part because many companies will fight and push against it. And you also need a very strong body of science and literature to support the causal link between these things. So if you think about what warnings actually exist right now, it's very few. It's on cigarettes, it's alcohol, warning pregnant women about the risk of alcohol, drinking alcohol during pregnancy. And there may be some other ones, but they're not a ton so far for a variety of reasons, because you have to have a really strong body of science, but also you have to fight against companies and lobbyists that are proactively fighting against these labels. Years and years ago, there were also conversations if there should be like warning labels on sugary products and other things. So it'll just be interesting to see how the lawsuit unfolds, but also if there is a push to put labels on things, hair relaxers moving forward, what the actual wording would be, right? And what Black women should know, or women should know in general. And then separately, I also mentioned during our break that we're talking about consumers, right? What women, Black women who are opting to get hair relaxers, what they should know. But it's also an overlooked group are hairdressers, salons, cosmetologist. And when you go, I have not been to cosmetology school to do hair, but typically you go, but I do know many hairdressers, and when they go, they're learning about how to do hair relaxers, how to put in color, how to do cuts,
like skills based,
right? And that's very important, how to do those things in a safe and in a safe way. But they're not, most of the hairstylists that I know, none of them, I don't know anyone who's also like a pharmacist or a chemist. And so they may not know, even though they know how to do the skill of it, they may not be aware of all of the chemicals in the different products and what those chemicals can do. And so in parallel to educating consumers, it's also really important for scientists and researchers and places like the NIH and the FDA to also make an effort to do education for professionals within the hair industry, so they also can be educated and informed about ways to reduce risk. So for example, we're talking about hair relaxers, but there's also dyes and chemicals in hair dyes. There can be chemicals in like synthetic hair that women get their hair braided. So there's a lot of education to go around for consumers, but we should not forget about professionals in the hair industry as well.
Absolutely. So we've got about 60 seconds left, and I'm going to ask you kind of a question that may require some thought, but I'm going to give it to you. Give me your best shot. Just the fact that this conversation is really balancing out beauty and health. And I'm just curious what you make of that tension between the two factors and what people should do about that, and how people engage with that kind of conversation. Right.
So what you decide to do with your hair, what you decide to do with your makeup, what you decide to do with your body is your choice. I would just advocate making informed choices. Separately, with regard to health, health is a lot of things. And so there's hair health. There's also things like your blood pressure and what you eat and having checkups. And we're talking about potential links between hair relaxers and uterine cancers, making sure you're getting your checkup with your gynecologist. And there are various symptoms of uterine cancer, but one common symptom is like vaginal bleeding. So just things like paying attention to our bodies. And if women are noticing abnormal bleeding, to bring that up and get that checked out.
All right. Aisha Langford is a professor of public health at Wayne State University's School of Medicine, whose work focuses on health communication. Thank you so much for all of the information on this. I hope it really clarified a lot of people who heard this news and need to know more.
All right. Thank you.
We'll be right back on the Metro.